So today we have Steve Anderson. You are the CEO of Catalyst. Yes?
Yes.
Did I say that right? I
Yes.
always want to say catalytic every time I look at that, but I know that's wrong.
Well, it's a mashup of catalyst for change and IT for technology. So that's kind of and if you're starting and trying to name a new business, and this is only a couple of years old now, it's always an interesting kind of trying to find domains and non-trademarked and right all that kind of stuff. So anyway, but that's where it came from.
So true. So you're the international best-selling author of the Bezos Letter, and it's been a book that I have really enjoyed digging into. So you're an expert in strategic risk and business growth. You've made the Amazon bestsellers list, Wall Street Journal, and it's been translated into, I think you said 18 languages now?
18 languages. Yep.
Which is amazing.
Yes, it is.
It is amazing because I love the story of how you came to starting to write the Bezos Letter. Can you share us? Because I think this whole concept was a brilliant concept, but it didn't start as a book. So share that with us.
My background is insurance and technology. And so the last 25 years I spent doing research, writing, speaking, and consulting, primarily for insurance agents in the United States on all this new technology. And 25 years, we've had a lot of new stuff. And so in that work, I spent a lot of time looking at what's coming and trying to predict a little bit or what to look out for. And again, these are the days of websites, right? Just starting to become a thing. And these were the days of Facebook becoming a thing. These were the days of everything, a lot of what we take for granted now, but at the time they were new and trying to figure out, okay, how to do it. What's the right way to do it? Is it worth it? Or is it just a waste of time, right? All those kinds of things. So in that process of working and trying to understand technology, it kept coming and kept coming rapidly. And I think that was the genesis for this thought that kept coming to my mind is the biggest risk businesses face today, actually not taking enough risk because you don't have the luxury of time today like you did 10, 15 years ago. You could wait for a few years, see how things played out a little bit and kind of decide if you wanted to jump in or not. Well, that led me to look at companies' success and ones that were successful and are gone, and ones that are successful and are still here and still being successful, and trying to understand what's the difference. Is there something there? And that's when I came across the Amazon, certainly as an example of a successful company that's continued to be successful. And then the letters to shareholders that Jeff Bezos started writing when they went public in 1997. And I became really intrigued with his writing, the shareholder letters, and often shareholder letters are really, really boring or bad, or they don't really tell you much except touting all the great things the company's done. Bezos was very different, and he did talk about things that were positive that were happening, but he also talked about what they were doing or why those things were happening. So that's what got my attention. And then at one point, I literally just sat over a few days and read every single letter published at the time. And there was a narrative, a string kind of going through the letters. And that's what really captured my attention. So the first thing I did, being kind of a marketer and, looking for leads and prospects, I put together a one-page executive summary, highlights of that year, kind of key quotes and some takeaways that I thought could apply to businesses, and put that into a PDF and was getting ready to give it away as a lead gen, right? You want this information and how it can apply to your business? Give me your name and email address and you can download it for free. Typical lead gen. Fortunately, I had some friends and maybe more importantly, a wife Karen, who's been in the book business for a long time, showed it to her, talking about what I'm learning and kind of some key takeaways. And she looked at it, she sent it around a couple of her book friends, publisher friends, and everybody came back and said, this is a book. This isn't a white paper, is what I was calling it at the time. And then I kind of went, what? So that started a journey, probably about 18 to 24 months. I'm actually trying to figure out what a book would look like. And the end result is the book that was published. And it certainly seems to have resonated with people.
It resonated with me. I mean, I have always loved just Jeff Bezos' writing, particularly his 97 letter I've read, 20, 30 times.
Mhm.
And I just love the way you pulled out, the synthesis of information year from year, 19 of them, 14 principles and 4 growth cycles, and then made it so digestible and then related it over time as the company evolved.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, I was going to say, Jerry, I'll give you a little, I don't know, insight or, kind of the messy process of writing a book. I was responsible for getting that quote, Anne Lamont's quote, shitty first draft of a book manuscript out and done. And sent it to Karen because she was going to help me, edit it and those kinds of things. And a couple of days later, I came home and she said, honey, I need to talk to you. Well, as a husband, that's not always a good comment to hear. That's like, oh, crap, what do I do now? And basically, my original manuscript was chronological 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001. I mean, literally
right.
chronological because that's how I had been thinking about all of this. And she said, I love you dearly. I love the concept and the ideas. This is boring. Nobody cares what year he said what. And so we started talking. My face I know plummeted because it was like, oh my gosh, I've done all this work. How I don't even know how I'm going to start over again. And that's where she came. Her brilliance are there principles that go through these letters? And so can you look at that? I said, I will try. And I mean, literally within probably less than 5 days, I had an original set of principles, and we decided to expand them a little bit and, went through multiple iterations until we got to the 14 and then the 4 growth cycles around those. So it was a wandering process to get to something that I think I'm actually really proud of.
You should be really proud of because it's brilliant. I have laughed a number of times because I too have been trying to write a book, and I have explained to my wife, who says, "Where is this book?" And I said, "Sweetheart, it's like being at a bar at 2:30 where there's beer spilled, maybe there's some cigarettes, it's dirty." And I said, "And you are pushing a peanut across that floor from one side to the other, trying to get to the finish line." And so, congratulations, because I haven't done it yet, and you did, and it's been a bestseller. So it is amazing. Let's break into. I have a handful of principles that I think, at least for me, and as I think about our audience, things that I'm thinking about. And so,
Right.
you mentioned this as like the genesis for you as you started to think about a lead gen, but then it turned into a book. Is the biggest risk not taking a risk? And one of the things that I say, to clients of mine and people that I work with is, you have to get left, you have to get right, because the only thing you find in the middle of the road is dead animals. And sometimes so many people over deliberate on situations that they're afraid to fail. And really the greatest potential problem for a company is to not make a decision. So the first principle of the book is encourage successful failure. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. And that's in the test cycle. So again, the first of the 4. And The cycles I put together because I believe businesses are always going through them. So they're always testing something. If it's a new business, they're testing an idea, a product, a service, a platform, whatever it is that they have created that they think has value. You have to test it and you have to figure out what is that idea and is it good enough to get something going. Well, again, back to Bezos and Amazon, one of the things that's again a thread throughout the letters is this idea of needing to experiment. And I I, I actually do think that all the talk about innovation that you hear in companies, they need to innovate, they need to, I think that's backwards. They need to invent. And in order to invent, they need to experiment to figure out what's going to work. And if failure is not a part of that experiment or a potential result, it's not an experiment. If you know it's going to work, it's not an experiment. You just do it. But experiment is going to lead to failure, maybe more often than not, but that's going to lead to inventing, again, to use a Bezos phrase, on behalf of the customer.
Mm.
And that's what he says all the time. We invent on behalf of the customer. So, and employees, I'm convinced, are not afraid of failing, but they are afraid of the consequences of failing. Meaning, if you have a culture at your company that punishes failure, you're not going to get people willing to experiment because most of the time the experiment's not going to work and they're going to shut down pretty quickly. And you're going to start as a company stagnating if your employees aren't willing to continue to look at new ways of doing things.
I think you're so right. Like I just, the piece that I'm like pulling back in is that people don't quit companies, they quit leaders.
Mhm.
It's the same concept. Like if you're creating a draconian environment where people don't feel free to make autonomous, agile, and engaged decisions, then I think you've missed the mark as a leader of like, how do we create that fertile environment where it's okay to fail? And I remember my daughter goes to a Montessori school. She was late one day because she had a dentist appointment. I was walking in the back doors and there were giant letters on the back door and it said fail. And I could see it from, 25 feet away. And I was like, wow, that is not very Montessori like. And then I got a little bit closer and it said first attempt in learning.
Yeah.
And I just thought, you're right, because, that is the Montessori method. It's like, okay, well, that didn't work. So let me try something else. And it's not, I went to a traditional school. The red pen, Mr.
Right.
Radsminsky used to mark up my paper like a death scene. And I would think, oh man, I obviously did not do very well there. And it scared me a little bit, although he was right. His edits were correct. So how do you get companies who start to gain some traction? I see them start to play defense a little bit. You have a successful company. Um, how do you hold on to that whole notion of like experimentation, invention, embracing failure so that you can rinse and repeat? What's the mindset that needs to go into that?
Well, I think a couple of things. One that comes to mind, and I always like to say when I talk about this principle, is it's important to also acknowledge that Amazon is intolerant of incompetence. So this is not just willy-nilly, let's just see what happens. It's very intentional, it's very structured, it's very strategic in how they go about these experiments. And I think one of the tools that I think is amazing, very counterintuitive, that they use to help put structure around this idea of experimentation is what's called the six-page narrative or the working backward document, which is what is used anytime they're making a decision about when to move forward on an idea, on a project. And this is literally a written document it is handed out at the meeting that has been called to make a decision on, yes, we're going to try this experiment. Here's what we think. What's really interesting is in 2004, Bezos banned slide presentations at
Mhm.
Amazon meetings. No keynote, no PowerPoint, nothing. It had to be a written document. And it passed out at the beginning of the meeting, not sent out beforehand. Because what Bezos says is executives are busy. They're going to say they read it, they didn't. And so literally we have homeroom at the beginning of the meeting. Everybody's reading the same document, quote, on the same page. And then you open it for discussion and questions and further clarification. And there have been a number of Amazon employees write about the experience and say the word that sticks in my mind is it's magical. Literally think about everybody in that meeting is literally on the same page because they just read exactly the same thing. That now think about it, and let me give you an example from Amazon. In 2014, Jeff Bezos announced the Amazon Fire phone. We have the iPhone was announced in 2007. Android phones were already out. Who needed another phone? Well, this was a Jeff Bezos pet project, right? So I think he's brilliant, but even he doesn't get everything right 100% of the time. That Fire phone was an utter failure. At the end of 2014, they wrote off $178 million in inventory and development costs. At one point, they sold it on the Amazon site for 99 cents. They couldn't give it away. Nobody wanted it. Failure. Pretty big one, right? Now, for small business, you've got to gauge what you can, absorb in your failures, and that's part of that process. But here's the success. 4 months after Bezos announced the Fire phone, he had his first demonstration of a new product, and it was a cylinder that sat on a desk that you could talk to. What now we have become known as Echo is the hardware. Alexa is the machine learning software that actually interprets what you say, looks it up, and responds to you. That I think we can say is a pretty big success.
If you're in my house, well, we have 7 of them, so it's a pretty good
success. Is there a room that doesn't have one, right? Well, and so again, the pivot is they took everything they learned about voice processing when they built the phone and were able to repurpose that into the Echo device. And technologically, it's actually a really sophisticated device. Literally, I can stand across the kitchen and say, Alexa, set timer for 9 minutes. It hears me, understands me, and confirms that the timer has been set. So that's just a little example. And Amazon fails a lot. I mean, you hear it, they stop projects, they close retail stores, they open new ones, they keep experimenting to figure out what's the right mix of things that they need to be doing going forward.
I think it's so important. And obviously, we can't bet the farm on these things
No.
that are experiments, right? So we have to push a little bit of chips in there. And, I'm struck with kind of the same concept. Years ago in a different life, I interviewed Lindsay McGregor, who wrote the book Time to Perform, who was a best-selling author too. I think her husband's name is Neil Doshi. And they talked about engaged cultures and running experiments and constantly running all of these little experiments that not only improved engagement, but also moved organizations forward faster. And I think we get so averse for it's the same concept of accountability. I think we have to reimagine accountability, not as the slap on the wrist, but the shared path to winning. Here's what we committed to do, and here's the path to winning. And I think experiments are the same way, whereas I would look at my red sea of paper from Mr. Rad's and think, oh, I failed. And that was a stopping point. If we can readjust our mindset to a rinse and repeat mindset, I think that actually serves you to accelerate. Okay, well, that didn't work. Let's go to the next thing. And I spoke to some University of Florida students a few weeks back, and we were laughing um, because I said, I don't know that anyone has failed more than I have in my life,
Yeah.
and I'm proud to say that because it's because I'm to do really big things. Because if I always succeeded, then I'm never leaving the dock. The boat is never
Right.
leaving the dock, and I just think it's such an important principle, especially for it may become second nature to a guy like you who's been an entrepreneur, a guy like me who's been an entrepreneur. But when we look at leadership throughout an organization, if we foster an environment where people are scared to fail, you will continue to do the same thing and expect some type of different result, and it's never going to happen.
Well,
And so,
it's not. Yeah. One other comment on the narrative. One of the real beauties of it is now you have a document. If it does fail, right? Now you have a document to go back to and say, what didn't we understand correctly? Or what should have we seen and prevented or learned more, or how would we prevent the failure in the future? So it's really an after action review document that you have available to you to have a structure around learning, not just, oh, by the way, let's think about what we could have done different.
it, it, I think that's a great point because process creates repeatable, scalable, and predictable results, right? And so one of the things that I've moved to in my strategic planning is problem-based narratives. So here's the problem we're trying to solve. Here's the assumptions that we had, and here's the deliverable to try and solve this problem. Because when you rely on verbal tribal knowledge, guess what happens? I remember it differently than you did. And
Yeah.
what were we trying to do here? And
Why did we decide this?
right. I know it's amazing
Right.
how short people's memories are. It's like, why do I remember this? I was here last quarter with you guys. That I still remember it. Anyway, I think writing it down, the process of writing it down. Megan Bowen talked about this in she was an implementer working with her CEO, who's a dynamic visionary. So how do we control a visionary? Well, we write down business cases, and
Yeah.
visionaries are less apt to actually write down business cases when it's not really that important. It's just kind of an idea. And I thought that was great feedback from her. The next one that I wanted to go to is obsess over customers, because I say this all the time. You have to solve a problem that is painful enough and important enough that people will pull out their wallets and pay you. And if you are not super clear about the problem that you solved, then it's easy to get distracted, all those shiny objects that are sitting out there. And so, what does it mean to obsess about the customer?
I think it's a mindset shift. So every business owner just starting out or been around for a while understands the importance of customers. And we talk about it in terms of customer service, customer journey, customer success, those kinds of words. In that first 97 letter, Bezos says in one whole section, we will obsess over customers. And I've always been intrigued by his use of that word, obsession, because it goes so deeper than what most business owners talk about their customers. And it almost has potentially a negative connotation, right?
Yep.
You're too obsessed over this. But can you be too obsessed over your customers? Well, in Amazon's case, no. And in fact, I think one of the possible reasons you hear some negative stuff about Amazon, certainly around worker conditions and things like that, typically specifically in their fulfillment centers, is their obsession really with three customer pillars. Obsession with wide selection. So they have a lot of stuff you can buy. Obsession with low pricing. They negotiate hard with manufacturers and others to have the best pricing possible. And third, fast delivery. They're obsessed with getting you your package, if not in hours, then certainly in a day or 2 days. Well, all of that necessitates the logistics piece of it, of pushing people to be as productive as possible and get that stuff through the system and on your front porch. But it's obsessing over your customer from Amazon's perspective is knowing your customers' wants, needs, and desires so deeply that you can invent on their behalf. And again, I think that's a different mindset of thinking about customers. And let me give you one example.
It is next level. Let me just hop in
Go
here
ahead,
just for
please.
a second, because I think this is super interesting and where leaders get it wrong, Steve, is particularly visionary leaders. It's in our mind. We have a clear picture of what it is that we want to see happen. We forget to make it come out of our mouths and articulate it. So then people are confused. And when you say, well, here are the stakes of the game. We're going to have wide selection, we're going to have low prices, and we're going to have fast deliveries. It makes decisions so much easier of how we're going to align our resources to opportunities, which means wide selection. Am I going to have the whiz bang thing from Namibia? The answer is yes, because I want to have the widest selection that I possibly can. Does it mean that our buyers are going to negotiate like really, really hard? Yes, because we want to have the lowest prices. And the fast delivery, they've invented and displaced UPS and FedEx. They still work with them, but now they have their own planes, they have their own trucks. God, I don't know if anyone else sees Amazon trucks up and down their street every single day. But when we create clarity for our people, it makes decisions obvious and simple and easy to do. And I think it's a place where people really miss in doing that. But, like you have to know the customer. I'm amazed that, I'll speak to marketing leaders and say, when was the last time you spoke to a customer?
Right.
And they'll say, oh, it's been a hot minute. It's like,
Yeah.
well, how can we invent on behalf of the customer? How can we advocate? How can we create, attention and awareness and community around our brand if we don't know our customer better than anyone else in the world?
Yeah.
And that's why I love this whole obsess over the customer.
Yeah. And that really is the core idea behind it, is knowing your customer so intimately. And this is not focus groups. This is going in the field. This is being what they do and whatever that looks like in terms of your research. But it's again that deep, deep understanding of what I do call friction points. I'm amazed at how many businesses don't understand where their customer has friction with them. Meaning it could be payment, it could be delivery, it could be Amazon obsesses over the website. Why don't people go to Amazon's website to buy stuff? Because it's so easy. Well, that's intentional, and they've spent billions of dollars to make it that way. In fact, my wife, I still remember a conversation we had. I was looking, I don't remember what it was now, but I was going to go to the hardware store. I think it was a filter or something I needed. I was going to go to the hardware store, and she said, well, does Amazon have it? I said, I don't know. And look, it's easier to get from them than go to the hardware store on a hit or miss if they might have it or not. And Amazon has made it so friction free that it's easier to get it there than what we've done in the past, which is go to a store. So is that Amazon's fault? Are they putting retail out of business? Or is retail not adapting to customers' expectation and removing the friction that their customers experience? And I think that is a really good question for any business to ask.
I think it's a great one. And Bill Holmes, who is one of our super fans, just showed up, and I appreciated him because 2 weeks ago he sent me some feedback on the show about what it feels like on the other side as a consumer and things that I should be thinking about. There he is.
Mhm.
And we haven't been able to hook up yet, but Bill, I appreciate that you took the time to do that because um, if I'm going to go do this, which is positively impact 5 million people in the next 5 years, he made some great points. And so, there's part of me that could have been like, oh, what does Bill Holmes know? But I know Bill, right? And it's like, thank God that people care enough to actually articulate, hey, here are some ideas that I'm thinking about
Yeah.
because we're always better together. We're on this mission together. And I think when people can readjust this mindset of, well, there's the market, there's the vendors, there's the suppliers, and then there's us as the company. It's like, no, no, no. This chain is all together from end to end. And when we map the customer journey and we obsess over them, it becomes obvious the decisions that we need to make. You have to actually take the time to get to know the people that you have the honor to serve. And as you have said, invent on their behalf. No one came up and said, hey, let's have a conversation about leaders and pitfalls that leaders have, and why no one's ever showed up and said, I really want to suck at work today, but it's been totally ineffective. Right? It's not their fault, it's our fault. So let's have that conversation. So I'm trying to invent on listeners' behalf. And so, Bill, I'm grateful for you that you reached out to me and said, hey, here's what I'm thinking, because it makes it better for me, it makes it better for the community. And that's what it's all about, for sure.
Great.
Speaking of which, one of the pitfalls that I see inside companies, and it's amazing when you think about the scope of Amazon Web Services, their music, their television division, their web store, is the whole notion of make complexity simple.
Mm.
And I say this all the time. I find people try and be too smart and too cute for their own good. But in having scaled a couple businesses in my time, nothing like Amazon, right? But I don't think anyone else can make that claim either. Um, Complexity is the enemy of scale. And so, how has Amazon imbued that into their culture to make complexity simple?
I think this is an example where each of the 14 principles stand on their own and they're interrelated.
Mhm.
So let me give you where that principle and name came from. I still remember the day I was driving somewhere listening to, I think, NPR radio, and Amazon had just announced that they were buying a company called PillPack. So it was their first foray into the pharmacy business. And the stock of Walgreens and Rite Aid and CVS all dropped on the day of that announcement. And one of those CEOs, I don't remember which one right now, was being interviewed on the show. And he said, I'm not worried about Amazon. The pharmacy business is more complicated than they realize. And I literally said out loud to myself in the car, but that's what Amazon does. They make complexity simple. And let's go back to 1998, 99. One way they did that way back then was one-click shopping. So it's hard to remember now because it's ubiquitous. But in the beginning, every time you bought something online, you had to enter all your information, your name, your address, your credit card information, right? Shipping preferences, shipping address, all of that information. Amazon invented, created that process for storing all that information and that what I sometimes call insidious little button, one click shopping, right? Just click here, everything else we know, It's on its way. It was so unique that they received a patent on it. And that patent just expired, I think 2017. But before that, Apple actually licensed their one-click patent intellectual property so they could add it to their music store, iTunes, et cetera, et cetera. But that to me is an example of always thinking, how can we do this better? And that's the core of making complexity simple. Getting a package from a warehouse to your porch is hugely complex. And they've made it simpler, at least, if not simple. Here's a recommendation. I get fascinated by this stuff, so maybe you all listening won't. But Amazon now has virtual fulfillment tours. So an Amazon fulfillment center is where stuff is warehoused, where it's picked off the shelf, where it's put in a box or a package or something, and it's shipped out. Well, you can actually take a virtual tour now today, and I believe that it's Amazon Virtual FC Tour or something close to that. So Google that. You can sign up, and it literally is a live virtual tour. I physically, prior to the pandemic, had physically gotten tours at 2 different fulfillment centers. It's an amazingly complex process that you as a buyer are completely insulated from. It's just simple. I just click buy.
You don't have to think about it because they have.
Yes.
Right?
That certainly helps them, right?
100%. And I think, for people who are listening, one of the ways that I've seen this done really well is to map the customer journey. Like every step from pre-awareness, like they didn't even know Amazon existed, all the way through to someone's leaving a review because they had a great experience, hopefully.
Yeah.
And if you map that process all the way through, you will start to identify, Steve, all of those friction points of where customers get hung up. And then you just start to optimize each
Right.
of those steps. Like, let's start with the biggest bottleneck first. Let's move to the next one, move to the next one, move to the next one, innovate. Hey, how do we do this differently? I think there's so many people who hang on to, well, that's the way it's always been done, or that's the way the
Right.
industry does it. And my answer is, let's rewrite the rules. Let's rewrite the defaults to change the levers and to increase the throughput and the end result.
Yes.
And I think sometimes we just continue to operate by whatever the defaults are. Like my example I always give is, people say, just by our nature, have a good day. Well, that's just been ingrained in us. And so I pattern interrupt and say, well, do you not like me? Because I don't want to have a good day. I want to have a great day. Why would you only want a good day for me? And people are like, oh, I never thought about it that way. And so, when we start to go through this process of like breaking our defaults and thinking about things differently, we can take what is complex and make it simpler and simpler and simpler for our people.
Yeah. And they do it. And that's where it hooks into that experiment idea to be able to invent. And then that's where innovation can continue to take place as you continue to manage that process. And what you described, Bezos' phrase is a skeptical view of proxies. So for him, a proxy is a process or procedure that's not serving the customer well. And how can we continue to work on it? And that's where innovation does come in, work on improving that process or procedure so it does a better job of serving the customer.
Yes. And just like everyone should be selling inside of a company, I think everyone should be thinking about the customer and the experience that we're creating for them, and not shrugging our shoulders when we see, that's not very good. Because when better is
Right.
possible, good is not good enough, because there's someone waiting to displace you. And it leads into the last principle. By the way, I have so enjoyed your insights. I'm so grateful that you are here. If anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat, or we'll just bring you on and you can ask Steve yourself. But this whole concept of believe it's always day one, right? I ran a construction company that went from 7 million to 13 million to 28 to 30 million in 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I was always concerned about was people who started joining us later in on the journey. They didn't see how we had gotten our teeth bashed in. All they did was they walked in and they saw the press and they saw, lots of nice things, and we had good benefits and just all of those things. And so I met with every new employee to make sure that they were grounded in the approach of how we got here, which was service to the community, service to our customers. And it was super critical. Why do we have to always believe it's day one, according to Jeff Bezos?
Again, back and like you said, you've read that 97 letter a lot.
Yep.
He has attached that 97 letter to every subsequent letters that he wrote since. So he put that much importance on that original letter. In that letter, he said, it's day one for the internet. Again, remember, this is 97. It was hardly day one for the internet, right? It was slow. It was right. All those kinds of things. In fact, I think the letter, a year or two later, he called it the World Wide Web, right? Because bandwidth was low, all of those kinds of things. But he said in that original letter, it's day one for the internet and for Amazon.com if we execute well. And again, that is one of those threads that I saw throughout all the subsequent letters, meaning every letter at the last paragraph, typically, he said something like, it's still day one, it's always day one. In the 2019 letter, he said, even with all the troubles, it's still day one. So that's a really important concept for Bezos and for Amazon. In fact, the office building in Seattle, where his office was, it's called the Day One Building. And there's a plaque in the lobby. I actually took a picture of it while I was there one time that reinforces this idea. So it's built into their customer or into their culture. And the idea is it's a mindset. Are you coming into your business this morning thinking it's the first day you're open, with the excitement, with the challenges, with the mindset to continue to work on the business? So in 2016, Jeff was in front of a couple thousand Amazon employees in Seattle at a all hands meeting. Typically quarterly, he would do this. He was at the end of the meeting taking questions from the audience, from employees. And the last question of that meeting was, Jeff, what does day two look like? And what he said was, day two is stasis, followed by irrelevance, followed by excruciating, painful decline, followed by death. And that is why it's always day one. Now, I want to go back to when we first started. Those companies that were very successful and are no longer here, Kodak and BlackBerry and Blockbuster, and write a whole list of one. What was really interesting to me is to make that day two process or path very clear in those companies. And I call it the hubris of success. And you mentioned this earlier. When companies are successful, they tend to start protecting what got them there, not looking at what they need to do next. And while that process could take a long time, 20 years, maybe longer, once you start down that path, it's really difficult to stop that degradation of success, mindset, and effectiveness as a business. So the more you can think about it early, maybe the more you can try and prevent that from happening.
We talked about this. Microsoft was one of those companies who
What it
started
is.
the negative spiral to death and
Yeah.
was becoming relevant, was being displaced by, on the cloud side, by AWS, by Google. And, their new CEO has done a great job of bringing them back into relevance. And so,
I
I
think
just look at, yeah, go.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I
Yeah.
was saying I think even looking at uh, uh, um, uh, obsessing over customers or a different approach to that, a understanding where they play best. I mean, for a long time, they never had iOS apps, right, for their flagship Office products. He came in and boom, they were out and available within months. And again, understanding their customers had chosen. They missed for mobile, no question. But that doesn't mean they couldn't come back and take advantage of it. So I think that's a really interesting study in terms of Microsoft. And I think unusual. I don't know too many others that have done it that way. Of starting down that day two path, but being able to pull themselves out and come back to being a day one type company.
Which leads me to the question of, will you be next writing about Microsoft and how they've brought through that from world dominance and, Bill Gates being the richest man in the world and Steve Ballmer.
Yeah.
I mean, they created more billionaires than anyone else. And to now, um, I think that's at the essence of like great leadership does make a difference.
Yeah.
Because it sets the tone for everything that's happening inside an organization. And that's why I've always been intrigued about leadership and how it can transform an organization or it can just shackle it to mediocrity. And
Yeah.
that to me is like, let's be shackled to mediocrity. I mean, I think I'm only going to live once. So like, let's go have as much fun as possible and go do as many really cool things as possible. Because one day I'll be like Nathan Yang or Haley Fulmar or Craig Beskey or Courtney Bertell. All these people are amazing. Maybe I'll be as cool as them.
Yeah.
Steve,
Yeah.
last question for you. I'm going to ask, out of the 14 principles, and you've been successful in business too, what's the one that you think is the most important?
Question is like asking me which of my 7 grandchildren I love best. So, right, there's a reason there are 14. But I would say, and one we didn't talk about, and I'll do a short one here, is understand your flywheel. So, quick background: Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, published in October of 2001, chapter 8. It's likely on your shelf somewhere, right? Pull it out. Just go to chapter 8. That's called The Flywheel and the Doom Loop. Yeah, it's over there, right? And in August of 2001, before the book was officially published, Bezos invited Collins to an offsite senior leadership retreat. And he spent one entire day just talking about the flywheel. And that senior leadership team literally drew out, and you can go to Amazon's website and see it, their flywheel, what they called the virtuous cycle. And at the center of that was growth. And we've already talked about several things like how do you get customers to keep coming? Well, you make the website experience so good that people talk about it. Amazon amazingly did very little advertising to get people to the website. They spent their time, effort, and money on making the website irresistible. The more people that came to the website, the more negotiating power they had with manufacturers. So that led to lower prices. Lower prices brought more people to the website. And then they did something stupidly crazy. In 2001, they created Amazon Marketplace. They allowed third-party sellers space on their website to sell their products to Amazon's customers. Crazy. And in fact, no business did it up until a few years ago when Walmart finally said, my interpretation, we give up. We can't continue to compete. Here's what Bezos said about that, which illustrates another point we talked about. He said, if our customer can find a product that we don't have, or we don't have an inventory from the third party seller, that's better for the customer. If they can find it at a price that's better than ours, that's better for the customer. And ultimately, that will be better for Amazon and for our shareholders. So think of that counterintuitive, opening up literally the keys to the kingdom, quote unquote, that very important product page to third party sellers. The last numbers published from Amazon was 68% of all sales on the Amazon website were from third party merchants. Now, Amazon takes a percentage of it. They built the logistics network. I mean, that's where they can maximize, right, their margins like nobody else can, because they invested so much in the early days to create the platforms to make all of this work.
I think it comes back to, and we didn't talk about it, but think long term, right?
Yes,
But when we are driving short term results, our horizon gets real short.
it does.
But,
It doesn't allow us to invest for the future.
right, to experiment, to do all of these things. And so, it's why you see such churn inside people and customers and sports teams. But if you can adopt that long-term mentality, I've talked about this before on the show. I haven't even looked at any of our statistics around the show. And it's because I know this is the right thing to do. I'm trying to be a craftsman and get better at this every single day. And I know that over time, we'll get this formula right. And that there will be a very significant audience for it. But it could be really depressing if I looked and saw, oh, it's only my mom that's listening to this show, which is why so many shows start and so many shows don't continue on. And
Right.
I've always had that mindset of like, I'm going to serve the people who show up, 8 today. But I know there's lots of people that listen to it, and that long-term mindset just serves you so well as long as you don't have the cash pressures behind you of
Right.
like having to, make bad decisions. And I think it's amazing stuff. Steve, how do people find you and connect with you if they want to learn more? Because if I was sitting in the audience, I'd want to be learning from a guy like you.
Well, the book is available on Amazon. Not too much of a surprise there. The book website is thebezosletters.com. You can certainly reach out to me at steve@thebezosletters.com. And on LinkedIn. That's my primary social platform. And I've got a pretty big following there also. So Steve Anderson might be related to insurance a little bit because I've got, kind of both things going on there. But let me know you listen to the show. I'd love to connect with you.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming. One of the things that I have learned that I am not good at and that I'm trying to get better at is to remind people, like word of mouth, that if you've enjoyed the show, we would love for you to rate the show on iTunes. And if you can let people know, hey, I learned something. This is a great use of time, whether you consume it on the bestplacestolead.com, you do it on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, it doesn't matter. But we are trying to, create a movement where people love the work that they're doing. And as I say, more smiles in the world. That's really what we're after. Because when people are good at work, they can be great at home. And when we're good at home, we can be great at work. Those two things are synergistic. And I think, as we were just talking about the Microsoft CEO who changed the fortune of day two for that company, leaders do make a difference day in and day out. So I am grateful for all of you coming and joining with us today. Next week, we have Simon from Germany. Do not be concerned about his German accent. Man, we're going to talk about the European way of business and the American way of business, which is very transactional, whereas Europeans are much more relational, longer term thinking. And so I would say his last name, but I say it wrong every single time. So I'm just going to call him Simon. He's amazing. And Sebastian, God, I even got it wrong. Thank you, Maria. Sebastian. So he'll be here next week talking about relationships and how we cultivate relationships and long-term thinking. And I hope you guys have a great week. Steve, thanks again so much. Really appreciate you.
My pleasure.